56-54. Meanwhile, number 12, Maryland in front of number 11, Ohio State in the second, 57-50. I'm Jay Berman.
How about Knicks and Lakers late night tonight? Tons of college rack and NHL as well for On a Bench, 10 East, 7 West.
The only way you can take CBS Sports Radio 1140 with you is with the radio.com app. Download it today and listen to us anytime, anywhere. We've got your Raiders covered.
Knock on wood if you're with me.
This is Silver and Black Tonight on CBS Sports Radio 1140. And now, here's your host, Scott Gobranson. Sound off with Silver and Black Tonight on CBS Sports Radio 1140.
All right, welcome back. We were supposed to be on top of the hour. We had some craziness here at the station, some gremlins roaming around or something, so we apologize for getting on the air late. You haven't missed anything, just us. Yeah. Myself, Scott Gobranson, here with you, as well as Chaz Osborne. Chaz, how you doing tonight, brother?
Good, buddy, good.
You got stuck in that CES traffic out there, didn't you?
Yeah, boy, it usually takes about 20 minutes to get here. It was 30, 35 minutes tonight.
Wow.
Crazy.
It is crazy. It's one of those, for those of you that don't know, the Consumer Electronics Show, one of our biggest conventions of the year, is here now and is just jamming up the streets. We love it, but it's all good, so we wanted to welcome Chaz, and thank goodness he got here because we wouldn't want him stuck in the traffic. All right, we're going to jump in, and tonight's show, I'm really excited about our first guest here because one of the things, Chaz, when you talk to Raider fans, I think they honestly believe that the Raiders, when it comes to the NFL, because of the history of Al Davis and the team and the lawsuits and all that stuff, that the Raiders, Chaz, are more penalized than any other team. Now, we know that. Like this year, it was true.
Yeah. I went back through this year to look at it because I was reading this article and it was just so compelling. So I was like, let me go back and read it for myself because I'm just kind of your casual fan. That, I see the penalty. I think, oh yeah, they're against us, and then when it's over, I kind of let it go. But boy, there was some glaring numbers popped up this season. 40% of the Raiders' penalties gave the opposing team a first down.
It's crazy.
And I'm
now I had a lot of people in running up to the show tweet at me, text me, whatever, saying, listen, look, you can't blame penalties for the Raiders losing, right?
Right.
Now, that may be true in some instances. In others, it may not be true. In fact, we're going to go out now on the phone line and bring in someone you can follow on Twitter at Ethical Skeptic, and that's where we're going to keep it. Now, this gentleman, I will say I do know his identity, but for reasons that we can't discuss right now, we're gonna stick with Ethical Skeptic.
I like that.
But just let me say that his background is impeccable. His education, everything. This man knows what he's talking about. So, Ethical Skeptic, thanks for joining us here on the Silver and Black Tonight.
Hey, Scott and Chaz, pleasure to be on Silver and Black Tonight and CBS Sports Radio Las Vegas.
All right, well, welcome. And of course, when I first saw you tweet this out, it intrigued me because I've had a couple of our readers and listeners who sent me spreadsheets with really good justification for why the Raiders' penalties are so out of whack with the rest of the league. Now, what you go into this document and what you say, and I've tweeted the pictures out of your kind of report on the Raiders up, and of course they can check out ethicalskeptic.com as well. But what you've said here, and I'm going to read some from your report here, is the Oakland Raiders have consistently been the most penalized team by far over the last 60 years of NFL operations. And you say here, when one examines statistics and the types of penalties involved through those six decades, and multiple dozens of various level coaches who were not highly penalized before they were with the Raiders, you find that, the data, it's hard to argue with this, Ethical Skeptic. It's hard to argue what you say here. Tell people why did you decide to look at the Raiders and the disparity and the penalties with this team?
Well, I think each year, we as Raider fans, and full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Raider fan, but I look at the data on penalties and I see each year, we're the most penalized, or we're number 2 or number 3. Mm-hmm. And I dismiss that saying, but we are also an aggressive team. But I began to look at each year's statistics as they rolled in, and this year in particular stood out to me. This year, the Raiders were penalized 8 times per game, while their opponents were penalized 5.6 times per game. Now, that's inside a normal range that runs from about 8 to about 5.5. So, in other words, the Raiders for 2019 were not only the most penalized team per play, they were penalized the most per play in the NFL this year, but also their opponents were the least penalized. In other words, the least penalized team in the NFL was generally whatever team happened to be playing Oakland in 2019. That's what I call the spread.
Yes.
Now, the spread is what damages a team. It's not being penalized a lot necessarily. It's when your opponents aren't penalized in the same games. That's when it becomes damaging. That's when you can turn a good team into an average team. You can deny a team the playoffs. And indeed, that's what happened this year with the Raiders.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is, when you looked at this and that's the point you just made, right? Which is the fact that, okay, if you're in a game, and we've seen games this year in the NFL where there were flags everywhere, but it was pretty equitable, meaning both sides were being called on everything, okay? When you see that, okay, fine, then statistically it works out. But what you're saying here is that almost every time the Raiders play and they have penalties, the other team is almost always penalized a lot less than they are.
Yes, correct. They were. I think Minnesota was the least penalized team. The second least penalized team in the NFL was whoever was playing the Oakland Raiders on any given week, and that's where I have a problem. That begins to affect the outcome of the season. So it's not. I'm not complaining about blown calls. Those happen all the time. There's give and take. This is more of a systemic bias, as we call it.
Right, and to me, I mean, you go in here and you say, and I want to get to the point about them not making the playoffs this year, the differentiation between record and what it could have been had the penalties been more equitable later on. But what you say here too is that that in any other context, if you were to look at this, whether it be gaming or another type of sport, that this would be known as cheating, and that you even go to the point of calling it a form of racketeering. Mm-hmm. Correct?
Yes, I do. It's racketeering-like because I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
I'm not fully trained on that. I have in my consulting history, I have pursued racketeering cases. This is very racketeering-like, but I won't cross the line of making a final accusation, yes.
Yes, and the other thing I want to get to here, too, because before people say, well, you know what, you're an undisciplined team and all that, and you have an answer for that, too. But what you write here, too, is the vast majority of the penalty incidences and imbalances involve calls that are open to subtle interpretation. So those are things that can be called on every single play, let's say like offensive holding or pass interference, but they're not called on certain teams, and they're more heavily called on targeted teams like the Raiders. In fact, flags thrown or not thrown at critical moments in a drive or upon a beneficial turnover or a touchdown. Explain that a little bit and talk about how that judgment versus, let's say, a false start or one of those penalties which is clear and everyone can't escape.
Yeah, I went through this myself. Back as far back as 1973, I'm like, hey, why are we getting so many penalties? And my buddies would say it's because you're an undisciplined team. And so I labored under that myth for decades. This year, when I looked at the penalties that were called on the Raiders, I defined a class of penalty called the discipline class. And that class of penalty is like delay of game, too many players on the field, neutral zone infraction, encroachment, false start, all those things that the fans can easily see on TV. It's easy to pick off those penalties. Those are the indicators of a team's discipline and coaching and discipline with regard to that type of penalty control in their game. Surprisingly, when I looked at those classes of penalties for the Raiders were at 80% of the NFL average. In other words,
wow.
They were in about the top third discipline in terms of penalties, that discipline class penalty. That actually shocked me. But when I compared this to what we call the more subjective call penalties, where it's interpretive on the part of the referee, the Raiders are penalized at double the rate of the NFL average especially as it pertains to first down, automatic first down, and scoring drives, sustaining penalties. Penalties. They're penalized at double the average rate of the NFL. Many teams, they're penalized triple their rate. So that actually shocked me. And that's independent of the spread. It's not just that the Raiders are called for more penalties. It's when they are called, they're devastating. They arrive at the most devastating moment in the game.
Yeah, that's what we talked about. Hey, Mr. Skeptic, it's Chaz. You talked about the 70s. You go back to the early ages. I feel like the Raiders' inordinate amount of penalties, was justified in the 70s because of, let's call it, their aggressive play. But, for me, starting in the 80s, Al Davis's feud with the commissioner, Pete Rozelle, off the field seemed to have an effect on the outcome of games on the field. In your research for this article, did you find any connection to that, off the field, foul play?
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it. The penalty statistics, although they were heavy in the 60s and 70s, 1982, the penalty statistics went out of control, and that's the year that Al Davis joined the LA Commission lawsuit. That's absolutely correct.
Yep. Well, I love the quote about the racketeering, because it's true. The referees can make bad calls all day, and if a player or a coach complains about it, they can get fined.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear here that we're not accusing referees of being dishonest. These are good, hardworking people. They're honest people. What constitutes racketeering is when you know that there are mechanisms of systemic bias. In other words, the organization in general is creating a bias, and you don't undertake the corrections, the quality control methodologies that you need to correct the product that you're delivering to your customer. When you don't take those actions, that's when you begin to range into doing wrong as an organization.
Again, we're speaking with the Ethical Skeptic. You can follow him on Twitter at Ethical Skeptic and also ethicalskeptic.com to read more of his work, some of which had my head spinning, by the way. Arkham's Razor, all this stuff. It's great stuff. But here's the thing. You talked about those penalties thrown against the Raiders that are critically devastating moments, as you call them. And you talked about this idea of the net uptake of the 16-game season and what those drives, those impacted drives meant to this team. And what you said here was equating to a whopping 96 additional opponent score points, okay, by the net drive points chart below, which you have in your thing, and beyond their opponent's performances, that because of this 6 points per game difference, because of ball control minutes, impact, and so on, the Raiders, it makes the difference between a 7-9 season versus a 9-7, possibly a 10-6 season, not to mention the fact that they didn't make the playoffs. So you're asserting here that because of this bias there, they probably missed the playoffs this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Stark. I mean, think of it as a fan. What could you do with 100 extra points for your team allocated into a season? And not even just as you wish on the games you wish to apply them to, but if you randomly allocated those points into the Raiders scores for the season, it would have taken us more than likely to 9-7 and 10-6, and that's only bringing us back to the average NFL team. If there was a bias for the Raiders, then it would be certainly even more dramatic than that.
Wow. Yeah, what's crazy too is the other thing you mentioned here, Skeptic, is the fact that. And I love the way you approach this because people will look out there and say, well, it's Raider fans. No, but the data, too, this is one to me that is fascinating, which is the coaches. What you did here is you said that Raider head coaches are penalized 26.3% more as the head coach of the Raiders than they were, let's say, than before when they coached another team or when after they leave the Raiders. So clearly, statistically, I mean, it's close. It's like 95. You had 95.6, 96.7 before and after they're with the Raiders. But with the Raiders, it jumps to 121.5, an average over 3.3 years. And that's 26. So a coach, it doesn't matter who that coach is, which is your point that the whole discipline thing goes out the window.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was pulling down the coach penalty data, I was sitting there cringing, going, please don't let this be true. Please don't let this be true. And I pulled the data down from Pro Football Reference and crunched it, a standard way I look at data. The average coach, before they arrived at the Raiders, coached 6.3 years with other NFL teams as head coach. And then coincidentally, just by the math, 6.3 years with other teams after they departed from being the Raiders head coach.
Isn't that crazy?
a 26.3% higher rate of penalty for that coach when they coach the Raiders. So this absolutely falsifies the notion that the extra penalties are an issue of team discipline.
Interesting. And not only that, one of the things, too, you mentioned in your write-up here that DJ Hayden, of course, played for the Raiders, and he said that he was penalized more as a Raider player than he was with other teams. So you did the math on that and the penalties that he had in his 3 years with Detroit and Jacksonville, and it's a 65% reduction in penalties per game against him played, and that's a 55% reduction in penalties per snap during his tenure with a team other than the Raiders. So this, being a Raider, it's coaches, it's players, everything. Now, the important question here, Ethical Skeptic, is you say, you talk about the referees being good men and they're out there doing a good job. So is this just inherent? Is this evil people at the NFL doing something, or is this ingrained in everybody's psyche when they become a young referee, enter the NFL and stay for 15, 20 years? Is it just something that's accepted and just happens to come out because of the history and the bias that's already been there?
Well, everybody knows the Coliseum. What I was hoping was to see statistics that said, if you go to the Coliseum, you got to put your armor on when you go in the game at the Coliseum. You want to be tough, and when you walk out on that field, if you're a ref or a player, you're going to play the game a little tougher than maybe you might elsewhere. And so I carried that theory for a while. But the fact that the opposing teams are penalized less sort of runs counter to that. I think that there can be, and I've done a lot of analysis through my career in naval intelligence as an officer in naval intelligence, and over 160 strategies with different companies. I do a lot of statistical analysis to look at subtle patterns like this. Organizations can produce bias without that bias necessarily being the intent of any given individual. My suspicion is that it resides right along those lines, that it's I don't know, it's sort of like a gigantic Ouija board or something with everybody having their fingers on the planchette.
Well, maybe them coming to Las Vegas will change their odds, although you know how bad the odds are. Most people who come here to gamble think they're going to beat the house, but you and I know better. But let me ask you this question then, the ultimate question, and again, thank you for your work. It's amazing. We're getting amazing comments, and there will be a write-up on silverandblacktoday.com, the website as well, tomorrow on your work. How does it change? If you look at it, it's the bias is there. So if you're an organization, you talked about being in the military and looking at strategies and whatnot. How do you, as an organization, how do you get the NFL to first recognize that there is that problem, that the bias is there, and that you need to do something to change it? And is there a possibility of that even happening?
I don't know if there's a possibility of the change happening. The goal of this article was to get to the NFL to at least consider the issue seriously. There are quality control standards and mechanisms. I've put them in place in companies that I've operated and clients that I've worked for. There are quality control standards that can be used in subjective call situations just like this. And the NFL referees themselves can institute these quality control measures. It's not a large burden or overhead of work. And they can watch how what's called their ergodicity, if you will, their outcomes, watch their outcomes, and then come back together as a team and say, hey, what are we doing here? How are we obtaining this bias? There's an ISO standard called 9001 that would allow the referee organization to put together their own quality standards and procedures. But I think all this is apropos because this year the NFL has announced that they're going to do a top-to-bottom thorough review of NFL officiating during the offseason in 2020.
Well, yeah, and I plan on, once we do our story and your document, too, I actually plan on forwarding to folks with the team because I think it's, they may or may not want to address it, but I think it's so based in everything from the scientific method to obviously statistics and all this stuff, and you've done an amazing job. And I know for Raider fans, it just reaffirms their long-held, let's just call it for the sake of this conversation, conspiracy theory that the Raiders were being held to a different standard. But clearly your work here shows that indeed is probably true. So we thank you for spending the time with us today, and we'll keep in touch with you because I want to see what happens when they get to Vegas. We have to wait another year and see what happens with the data. I want to see in 2020 if their luck or if that bias changes at all, or if maybe the Las Vegas stigma of being Sin City actually makes it worse.
Well, I think that there are a lot of people in Las Vegas who understand statistics, odds, and playing the game very well. So they're going to get a lot more scrutiny, they being the NFL. They're going to get a lot more scrutiny from the Vegas crowd.
They will. All right, ethicalskeptic.com. Check out his website. Amazing work in all sorts of areas. Yep. And, of course, this report, we tweeted out the 3 pages of it, and we will have a story tomorrow on silverandblacktoday.com. Again, thanks for spending the time with us, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Scott and Chaz, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Ethical Skeptic. Follow him on Twitter, @Ethical Skeptic. Fascinating work that he does, Chaz. And there you go.
I mean, as a Raider fan, it just makes me more frustrated to know that there's actually data to back up, the fact that the Raiders have been getting the pooch the last 30, 40, 50 years.
Well, and me growing up a Charger fan, when I disliked the Raiders as a kid and as a teenager and as a young man, I always thought it's because they're dirty and they're this. Yeah. But he shows here, Chaz, that all that is bupkis.
Well, I mean, okay.
For most of it.
Early on, they had established that reputation of playing dirty, right? Being the bully. But, they had the talent to overcome the penalties. I mean, George Atkinson, Jack Tatum, Matuzak, Alzado, right? They won the psychological battle before the game even started.
Right.
So,
but those were different because you're absolutely right. And he mentions that in the report, by the way, guys, which you should read. We tweeted it right at the beginning of the show, so check it out. He said, look, those aren't the penalties he's talking about that have been so damaging. It's the things like holding, offensive, defensive pass interference, these calls that are open to interpretation and could be called on every NFL play, but just happen to be called more on the Raiders.
Right, and that's what I said in the opening. 40% of the Raiders' penalties gave the first down to the opponent. That's just a huge statistic. It's hard. You can't overcome that.
No, you can't overcome it. And his contention, I mean – And I'm gonna in the story on the website, I'm gonna talk a lot about this, which is his contention that they should have made the playoffs. If it would have been more equitable this year,
right?
In some of those games, well, you can say, some of those were blowouts, but some of those there were drives and specific plays, like the roughing the passer against the Jets,
right?
We
talked about a few of them that the game could have went either way. And now that when you take a look back, and I think I'm a majority of the fan. I kind of complain about the bad calls on my team, or on the non-calls on the other team. And at the end of the day, I just accept it. And I think it was a fairly called game, and they bad calls even out. I never really think about it. But now that this article, it's got my attention.
And I'll tell you what, the ethical skeptic. This is one, and he mentioned that he's got military intelligence experience. I know who he is because he shared that with me as long as I kept it to myself. This guy is the real deal. I mean, he's a smart dude.
Talking to him.
And so we appreciate him being on. All right, we're going to step aside. When we come back, we're going to vent some more about it. But we're going to bring on Mario Tovar from Raider Ramble. Of course, RaiderRamble.com, another great website that covers the Raiders. We'll bring him on. We'll talk a little bit about 2019, get his take a little bit on what we've been talking about the past few weeks. We'll also ask him what he thinks about this penalty thing. And more. You're listening to the Silver and Black Tonight here on CBS Sports Radio 1140.
When you need inside info on your
1140.
When you need inside info on your Raiders, you'll find it here. This is Silver and Black Tonight on CBS Sports Radio 1140.
All right, welcome back to Silver and Black Tonight. Dude, I mean, Chaz and I didn't stop talking about the ethical skeptic and the whole penalty thing during the break, man.
When I started reading it today, I couldn't put it down. I was reading that just the whole website is.
And you know, a lot of folks on YouTube saying, "Well, what can be done about this?" And we asked him the question, right, which is, "What can we do?" He said his hope was he wrote it partly so that hopefully the NFL would take notice and maybe look at their bias and figure out a way to fix it.
Right.
So. We're still rocking. So I think that maybe that's the goal, and maybe they'll see our story and we'll forward it. I'm going to forward it to some folks at the Raiders and see what they say. All right.
Right.
Speaking of the Raiders, we're going to go back into talking a little bit about the Raiders in 2019. The conversation on Derek Carr won't end.
I know.
It just won't stop. This offseason, I think you're going to hear a lot about Derek Carr. You're going to hear a lot about Las Vegas and the move. You're going to hear more about Tom Brady. I mean, today alone, I could not get away from seeing Tom Brady on television or hearing about him on radio.
Well, he's so damn good looking. What are you going to do? But the Derek Carr thing, you can make an argument for both sides of it so easy that I can see where it's just such a lightning rod.
Well, it's a lightning rod, and I see now people who are what are called Carr stans, which I think is an insult because it's from an Eminem song. But anyway, people who are staunch Carr supporters are like, "Oh, you're whipping a dead horse now." It's like, well, no, yeah, that's because you don't agree with it. But people who do have an issue, and I think we've done a good job of Chaz looking at both sides of it and arguing. I wrote a story on the website this week.
A great article on the website about the common ground, and everybody's taking a side, but there is a huge common ground there.
Right. So bring in somebody to compete with Derek Carr. Mm-hmm. Maybe that gets the best. It's not anything against Derek Carr. It's just competition tends to breed better performance, at least most of the time. All right, we're going to go back out on the phones and bring in our good friend Mario Tovar from Raider Ramble. Mario, how you doing from Southern California, man?
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you coming on. All right, so you heard the stuff about the penalties. What do you think, man? Is that crazy?
That was very interesting. I know you shared that document with me before I came on, too. I think I agree to a certain point. I think a lot of it does have to do with the reputation. It has to do with the battle that Al Davis had with the NFL. I mean, it's too much of a coincidence not to be, you know?
Yeah.
So, and it's unfortunate because, I mean, how many games can we think of that the refs have pretty much cost the Raiders the game, you know? At the same time, though, I'm sure discipline does have a lot to do with a lot of those penalties. I mean, how many times can you really blame the refs for offside? That's a lot of that is discipline, you know.
Yeah,
so,
no, I think you're right, Mario. I mean, offsides, and a lot of his point is that it's more of the judgment calls that he was trying to focus on, and those I think Raider fans overall, just anecdotally watching Raider games, like I talked about the Jets game with Max Crosby and the roughing the passer.
Right.
That was a good example that changed I think it changed the whole scope of the game. But interesting stuff. All right, let's move on to 2019. You know, we've been talking ad nauseum in the last week and a half about the end of the season and what went well, what didn't. When you look at 2019, do you look at this as a relatively good, successful year in the rebuild process?
Well, I mean, without any bias or anything, anytime you have more wins than the previous year, I think is a good season. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yep.
The problem is that I think many fans don't understand is that at that stretch when they were in 6-4, I believe, they were overachieving. No one expected them to be 6-4. Of course, they were in win games. I mean, myself, I had them at 6-10 actually before the season.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they were definitely overachieving, which was a good thing. I mean, fans were excited. Everybody was excited. The problem is everybody gets so excited with the expectations now that, well, we're a playoff team now and, you know, we're contenders. And it's like, no, not quite. There's still a lot of holes, especially with defense. So, I mean, yes, it was a successful campaign. They got more wins than last year, but there's still many holes to plug.
Hey, Mario, it's Chaz. I really enjoy your articles there on the Raider Ramble. So let's just get to the argument then. I know your latest piece on Derek Carr. Where do you fall? On which side of the fence do you fall with the Derek Carr situation? Are you pro Derek Carr? You want to see him going forward, or maybe it's time to look in another direction?
That's not a trap or anything.
It's a tough one because I'm right down the middle too. It's like he's succeeding, and I think I can see him progressing.
I would definitely agree. I'm down the middle too, just because. I mean, look, I consider myself trying to be a journalist. What we try to do is present all sides.
Right.
If you look at the articles we've published, especially the two that you guys are referring to by Ryan Hawks, and we've had a couple more actually in the last maybe 48 hours, different sides, and I think it falls down the middle. I don't think anyone really has anything against Carr. Certainly not as a person, as a human being.
Yeah, of course.
He holds most of the passing records, or he's about to hold almost all of them. So no one saying he's not a good quarterback. I think the problem is that fans, I should say, are just fed up with the losses. They're fed up with missing out on the playoffs, and that's understandable, But the thing is, if they move on from Carr, what's the plan? You can't just cut ties and scrap everything and start all over. There has to be a plan in place if, in fact, Gruden and Mike Mayock have decided that he's not the guy. What is the plan? Keep him around another year, draft the guy. Then the issue is, do you trust a guy learning from Carr? That's the other thing. Even though in my opinion, he's going to be learning from Gruden. I mean, let's get that out of the way.
Yeah.
Not necessarily Carr. You know what I mean? That's what you're expecting.
Well,
the other issue too is, though, if they draft a rookie, starting from day one, Gruden's offense is not easy. It's one of the most complex ones. I mean, even I believe Gronkowski recently, was pointing out just how complicated it really is. So that's a lot of factors going up against the rookie starter from day one. You got Gruden himself, a complex offense, and now you got the national spotlight, first year in Vegas. You don't want your rookie to crumble under that pressure either.
No, and I think, the point I wrote about this week, Mario Tovar from Raider Ramble joins us, is the fact that I think if you look at the history of the Raiders, one thing that has worked really well for them and for other teams has been bringing in more like a veteran backup, or it could be a rookie if it's a top rookie, to push the other quarterback that maybe in certain situations, and the Raiders have had a long history of it going back to having folks like Darryl LaMonica and George Blanda and Kenny Stabler and having all these good backups. Plus, I think having a good backup makes sense. Look at 2016, for example. Derek Carr, unfortunately, goes down with the big injury. If they would have had a better backup quarterback there, who knows what could have happened. So I think having a good quarterback to push the other guy, but to also make your team stronger, to me, that's what I call the middle ground, which is you don't necessarily have to get rid of Carr. Some want to, and that's the only answer for them. But for me, at the very least, if you're going to keep him, then bring somebody in to push him as hard as they can.
No, I agree. And see, that's the other thing, too. It's not even Carr, but just think of Gruden. His biggest successes have been with two veteran, almost journeyman quarterback, Rich Gannon and Brad Johnson. I mean, that speaks for itself. And do you really trust, or can we really trust Gruden to develop a rookie quarterback? Has he ever done that? I don't think so.
He hasn't.
That's the other thing, too. Now, you're right. As far as bringing competition in, I was really surprised. I think you made a point of it, too, when you look at fans' reactions. When we put out a piece where we try to say, hey, there could be a middle ground. Why not bring in a veteran, a proven starter, to compete with Carr? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Carr, he was basically handed the keys. I mean, he was handed the keys, but call it what it is. He's never had anyone really push him. He's never had another backup breathing on his neck. His job was always his. His job was always safe. I don't think anyone can dispute that,
Right.
But I think,
Mario, you look at things like, remember who Aaron Rodgers played behind? Brett Favre, right? You had Joe Montana and Steve Young. I mean, you go back through the history of some of these. You had Drew Bledsoe before Tom Brady, right? So
not even that, but look at more current history. Look at Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah,
behind Alex Smith.
So
right. I mean, it's a plausible scenario, but like I said, it just depends on optics, how you look at things. I know there's a lot of fans that don't want to hear that. They just want, they defend Carr. It is what it is, but there's
strong feelings.
Nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with bringing in a veteran. And what if that veteran is the key? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the thing. At the very Worst case scenario is that you have another quarterback that you can go to. Best case scenario is it drives Derek Carr to be better, and there's nothing wrong with that. If Derek Carr gets better, that's better for everybody. So
that is the best case scenario.
Yeah, it is because, like you said, he's a good guy, and even though a lot of people don't like him as a play, but to me, having a qualified backup who could go in and play, and the team wouldn't lose anything by that happening is a big deal to me. Mario, dude, we're already out of time. I'm sorry, man. We had a crazy start, but I want to make sure people can find you at Raider Ramble, as well as what's your Twitter handle is at Mario Tovar, right?
My personal Twitter.
Yes, your personal Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's
check it
at _ Mario Tovar.
_ That's right. I forgot the underscore. And at Raider Ramble, a great website. Make sure you check it out. Good stuff on there. And you guys try to do what we do too, right? Which is always present both sides of the story. And even today, I saw you mixing it up there with some people who can't handle the other side of the story. But it's
what we try to do, Scott. That's what we try to do. We try to present all sides, and the readers decide for themselves.
That's right. And Mario, we'll have you on again real soon, man. And I appreciate you joining us tonight. Mario Tovar from Raider Ramble. Take care, brother.
Thanks, Mario.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you.
All right. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll close out the show. We'll talk a little bit about some Raiders news out of Las Vegas and some Josh Jacobs news as well. Some great news. Don't go anywhere.
Unfiltered hockey talk for Golden. from Allen to Zog, and all the Davises, Jacksons, and Woodsons in between. We've got your Raiders covered. This is Silver and Black Tonight on CBS Sports Radio 1140.
Welcome back, Silver and Black Tonight. The Raiders season may be over, but our season is never over. We go all year round. Right, Chaz?
Hey,
there's no off season for us.
Back when I was working for the Lakers, I used to think, man, why doesn't the Raiders have their own channel? Like, they could just show like old Super Bowl clips. They could just show Raiders, and then all of a sudden the Lakers got their own channel. I thought, hey, the Raiders should have done that. I was thinking of that a long time ago.
Yeah, well, maybe when they get to Vegas, they will.
But we're here year round for you.
We are here year round. Now, as we go into the summer and we get into some of the dead periods, we didn't do it last year, but this year I'm definitely going to give us a couple weeks off.
Nice.
I don't know if they're going to be in a row. But we will, because you know what? We need it.
Take us somewhere.
We're
tropical.
coming up. This is 91 weeks. We're approaching 100. It's a lot. So we love it. But it's all good. All right, guys. So we have a few minutes left. I just want to share some news and talk about this with you, Chaz. Today, Josh Jacobs, of course, a story. Everybody knows the story about Josh Jacobs having to live in his car in hotel rooms with his father, raising him and his brothers, and an amazing guy. Today, the rookie, now former rookie, going into his second year, Josh Jacobs, surprised his dad, Marty, with a brand new house in Oklahoma.
Nice.
And the Raiders tweeted out the reaction, and, this such a good story. I mean, his story should be a movie. I mean, it just should.
Yeah. I mean, just the fact, like you said, growing up, not homeless, but basically, and not knowing, and to get where he is now. And he's such a humble, unassuming kid. Just, you want everything for him. And this is just one of those great things.
It is. And I'll tell you, the other thing is today we also saw, it actually came out maybe a week ago or so. The Raiders now, Chaz, are selling bricks. So at the new stadium, for those of you outside of Las Vegas, you can now buy a brick with your name, family name. You can buy them in different sizes.
Right.
Whatever you want to say as a Raider fan. Of course, you can't curse or say anything bad like the Chiefs are effing terrible or something like that, which would be kind of funny.
Yeah.
But they're selling bricks starting at $850.
Oh, that's an expensive brick.
Let me tell you, Toto, we are not in Oakland anymore. So everything, and yes, and I don't mean that as a negative. It's just going to be realities. Everything is going to be more expensive in Las Vegas for the most part. Hopefully they make food and that kind of stuff more affordable like the Falcons did. Mm-hmm. But the bricks are pretty cool. They're going to be out in front of Plaza at Allegiant Stadium, and they come in different sizes. As I said, 2 major sizes, and then the third version, you can put the Raiders logo on it with messages or whatever you want to put on it. So we're getting closer, Chaz.
Yep. It's I can feel it in the air. I mean, you drive by that stadium, and it looks 70-80% done.
Yeah. No, it's getting there. All the glass is pretty much up. And so it's going to be
a lot of excitement in town.
It is. All right. Well, we had a little bit of an abbreviated show because of technical issues. So we appreciate you staying with us, especially those folks on the video. You stay with us as well. So we will be back with you Sunday, 8 to 10 a.m. as well for Silver and Black. Today, we're going to have Jay Schrader on to talk about Derek Carr on Sunday.
Right.
As well as some other folks as well. So stay tuned for details on that show. Chaz, thanks, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being
here.
We
got to buy that extra hour, man. We got to talk about this.
Well, thank God we don't have to buy airtime, but if we did, we need to lobby for the hour.
We got to lobby for that extra hour.
Anyway. For Chaz Osborne, Scott Branson. See you on Sunday.